This video covers part 2 of chapter 6, just page 238 to 244. Some of this you already used when you did your audience analysis discussion, so I'll just go over that briefly before I move into the section on title and thesis. You did work with your classmates on imagining an audience in the audience analysis discussion. Questions to continue to ask yourself: who are my readers? What do they believe? What common ground do we share? What do they need to know? Why should they care about the topic? But what I want you to think about, even though I'm going to be the one reading your paper, remember in college you're writing in general for an academic audience, and that'll also include your classmates. So you want to think about these as literate, intelligent, and moderately well-informed people who don't know all the same things that you know about your topic because they won't have done as much research as you have or know as much, and they require more information to make an intelligent decision. So I'll be reading your paper, but I don't want you to think that I've already taken a position on any of the topics that I've given you and that you're trying to figure out what I think is the right or wrong position. I'm just looking for a logic-based argument that uses outside sources to prove the point, that's organized and easy to follow, that considers objections and answers them. So here are a few of my own tips. Don't bore or insult your audience by explaining things too simply or offering dictionary definitions of terms a literate and intelligent person would know. Do offer explanations of difficult concepts and definitions of technical terms. Keep a formal tone. Don't use too much specialized language. And don't insult people who take a position that is different from your own. So when you get to the section where we're trying to deal with objections, don't say, it's clearly obvious, or it's so obvious, or you'd have to be a fool to believe. Like, just look at the language that you use when you're dealing with objections and try not to be insulting. Read page 239 to 242 carefully. It'll help you decide what information your audience does and does not need to hear from you, and how to ask yourself questions during the writing process to better address the needs of an academic audience. There's the checklist for imagining an audience. I'm not going to go over this in great detail because you've already used it when you did the audience analysis discussion, but it is there on page 242 for you. We're going to talk now about the paper. The other presentation and video in this lesson discuss in detail how to draft your paper. Don't neglect your title. Your textbook offers several tips on title writing, including using the title to hint at your topic. We did that with some of the essays we've read so far. The one, The Flight from Conversation, hinted at the topic but didn't directly state it. Don't be too provocative or sarcastic. You can alienate your audience by being too provocative or sarcastic. And be prepared to change your title as you draft and revise your paper. The opening paragraphs, again, I've gone in more detail about this in the drafting your research paper presentation and video, but you can also look at page 243 to 246 for some tips. They remind you also, don't get stuck on writing openings, just get something down, and then as you revise, keep going back and strengthening the introduction. Use it to attract the reader's interest, but don't do something, too generic or too cliched, like all throughout history, people have debated. Introduce the topic in the thesis. You have to have your thesis statement in that first paragraph. Give readers an idea of how the paper will be organized. Define any key terms or unusual or unfamiliar terms, and give readers background information they might need. Again, this is also covered in more detail in the drafting the research paper presentation. Once you have some ideas together, and I've asked you for a draft thesis in your outline, make sure that you're putting that thesis in the first paragraph. It should be the last sentence in the first paragraph, and it's the central point or chief position you're taking in your essay. Don't confuse the topic, for example, college, with a thesis, which could be something like state colleges should be tuition free. It's a very basic thesis. It could be more specific, but it would be a thesis and not a topic. Here are some sample theses from your textbook. Smoking should be prohibited in all public places. Does make a claim. More specifically worded, it could be smoking should be limited to specific parts of enclosed public spaces and entirely prohibited in small spaces such as elevators. So maybe once I've written the paper, I can see that I may have taken this and made it more specific. One that takes a different position but is also specific. Proprietors of public places such as restaurants and sports arenas should be free to determine whether they wish to prohibit, limit, or impose no limitations on smokers. There's a checklist for a thesis statement on page 237 that you should definitely make sure you use. I've also provided a clear checklist for the entire paper, but this checklist for a thesis on page 237. Make sure that your thesis statement makes an arguable assertion rather than just stating a fact, announcing a topic. This paper will be about fracking. This, in the following paragraphs, this paper will do this. Make sure that it's not a fact, that it's not announcing the topic, that it's not declaring an unarguable opinion or belief. Make sure it's actually a statement and not a question. And make sure it's broad enough to cover the entire argument, but narrow enough to do it in 6 to 8 pages. I've tried to make sure that the topics I gave you all could be covered in 6 to 8 pages, but make sure your thesis is also narrow enough to cover in 6 to 8 pages.